Hello, it's Pat DeCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world uh, because of the guest. It has nothing to do with me. Today, we're with Jordan Burroughs, arguably the best wrestler the world has ever seen, certainly in the opinion of many, the best wrestler America has ever seen. And he is just one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. He is professional, kind, hardworking, everything you would want in a champion or a representative of America for sure. Jordan is from Camden, New Jersey originally. Um, Ended up at Nebraska where he had initially mixed bag success, and then he steadily grew as a collegiate athlete. And we'll go on to talk today about what he did after college and what he's doing today. Welcome, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pat. It's good to be here.
Likewise, my pleasure. Um, I figured we'd start in Camden. What do you remember? What are your earliest memories of growing up?
Yeah. First, let me preface that by saying if you hear any kids in the background, don't be alarmed. Some screams or crying or some wailing in the back, but the kids are home today. I much about my childhood. I remember just being in a loving environment, but a competitive environment. I think that I was the youngest of four. I grew up in a middle class town, working class town, predominantly African American. So I was born in Camden, but my parents, shortly after I was born, we moved to a suburb of the city called Sicklerville, New Jersey. And it was so my parents could provide a more stable lifestyle for us. They wanted us to be out of danger, out of peril, and be in a suburban neighborhood with a yard and and quality public schools. And so we moved shortly after I was born. But I remember as a kid just being a competitor right away. I wanted to always win. Always wanted to challenge myself, but I was small and I was timid because of my size. My dad was always a large man. He was 6'2". He was over 200 pounds, and he was a big sports fan. He didn't play sports growing up, but he sports were important in our household. So he used to tell me all about all the great athletes that came from Philadelphia. Um, all back in the 80s and 90s. We're talking Sixers, Flyers, Eagles. So I grew up watching, all of these amazing athletes, and sports was big time in my household. So I knew that when I finally did start a sport, it was most of what I did as a young man was to impress my father
Hmm.
because I knew he was a big sports fan and I knew he was a historian. Like he knew a lot about the athletes. He knew a lot about sports, and the way it moved him, I wanted to be a person that he regaled in that particular area. So sports was important to me as a young man.
Wrestling is such a huge part of your life and mine, but that's not the story. What are your earliest memories of wrestling?
Yeah, I remember my very first tournament.
Mm,
Believe it or not, I was 6 years old. My first weight class was 45
mm,
pounds, and my dad took me to a tournament. Now, remind you, he knows nothing about the sport.
mhm.
He's only ever seen it like on TV occasionally, or he's heard about it, but he's never really watched it. He doesn't know how to coach it. He doesn't know any moves. So my dad was my first coach, and in my corner, he was just yelling out like anecdotes, like "Be tough, stay strong, don't give up." So like, but there were no like technical skills. It was just like only things to keep me focused mentally. So that was kind of my first memory, and I actually lost my first tournament. So I won my first match, and then I got pinned my second match by a kid who was getting coached by his mom. And it was a single elimination tournament. So I remember on the way out, we took a look at the brackets, and I asked my dad, I was like, "Hey, Dad, what place did I take?" And he was like, "I'm not sure. I think you took eighth place." And so it turns out that they were giving away participation trophies that day. So I hadn't earned a medal. Only top three place winners from the day actually got awards, but they were giving out participation trophies. So they walked me over to the trophy room, and they were giving out the participation trophies. Now, of course, the participation is the smallest and most insignificant of all the trophies that are being given out that day. And the first place trophy is the biggest. It's got the big golden guy in his wrestling stance on the top. It's like 3 feet tall, and it's a beautiful trophy. And that's the one everyone wants. And that's the one you get when you're a champion. And, from that first day, taking home that participation trophy, although it was small, it was the first thing I'd ever won. So I went home, showed my family, showed my older siblings that I felt for the first time like a sense of purpose and ownership. And so before every tournament, as a young man, my dad would take me to the trophy room and he showed me all the trophies that were going to be given out throughout that day. And of course, the first place trophy was always the biggest. And so that was my motivator when I was a kid. He was like, you see that big trophy right there? The only way you can get that is if you win all your matches today. Mm-hmm. And I would be like fired up, like, yeah, let's go. I'm winning all my matches today. So yeah, that was a good time.
How did you get introduced to the sport to begin with at age 6?
Yeah, I was a big WWF fan when I was a kid. I used to watch those guys, Macho Man, Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, all those guys when I was a young man. And so from growing up in that era to getting introduced basically through a flyer at my local elementary school, every season they would pass out flyers to the local youth sports programs. And, so I played football in the fall, and I typically ran track in the spring or played baseball or t-ball. And then in the winter, they gave out the flyer to the wrestling program. And I'll never forget, there was an eagle. We were the Winslow Eagles. And there was this eagle that was all buff and all muscled up, and it had a wrestling singlet on. It was like tearing through its wrestling singlet. And I saw that flyer. I was like, this is cool. Like, I want to do this. And so I took it home to my mom, and she was like, sure, I'll take you. And so I thought it was going to be like WWF. When I got to the gym, I'm expecting to see like a ring and tables and chairs. And when I saw mats laid across the floor, it was completely different than what my expectations were. But, the beauty of wrestling is you don't have to be big in stature to excel or to be successful at it. And I was scrappy right away. Like, I like to scrap. I like to roll around. I was tough because I was a shy kid. But when I got onto the mat, I turned into someone completely different. And I think my parents respected what it was making me into as well. And so it all worked out.
That's great. Tell me about high school. What do you remember about your high school program?
Yeah. So high school, so by the time I got to high school, I already had a pretty solid scholastic record. I was a state champion when I was like 9 years old. I was a state runner-up when I was like 11 or 12. And I had won a couple of tournaments, placed at a couple of national tournaments. So like, I was a pretty good youth wrestler. But when I got to high school, I was a late bloomer. So my freshman year of high school, I only weighed about 99 pounds. And of course, at that time, the smallest weight class was 103. And so I was grossly undersized, and I was a seasonal wrestler. So this is the time where guys are starting to get really serious. They know that they're going to pursue this long term. And I was only wrestling from November through March, where guys were wrestling all year round. So the kids that I was beating as an 8 and 9-year-old were now in return beating me. So it was kind of a tough period of my career. I went, I think, 16-10 as a freshman in high school, something like that. And I didn't even make it to deep into the postseason. I lost Friday night districts, and it was a rough year. I took a lot of lumps that year. It was definitely a rebuilding year for me.
How about your sophomore year?
And then my sophomore year started to improve. So I got bigger. I went to 112, and I think my record that year, I was like 28-12 or 28-10. But I made it to the state tournament. I lost in the placing round at the state tournament. And fast forward my junior year, I win districts, win regions, and I make it all the way to the state finals as a junior. So like, I was progressing. My trajectory was going upward. I went from not making it to state, losing in the placing round, being a state finalist, to finally my senior year, I won a state championship in a very close and dramatic fashion. But I knew I was trending upward. I was doing the right things. I was always willing to work hard. I was always willing to sprint, run, lift, wake up early, cut weight, like do all the extra. That never really was something that I shied away from. So by the time I got to becoming physically developed and physically gifted, because I was so small for so long, I developed all the intangibles. I was tough. I was gritty. I was competitive. I never really quit. So that was a time where all those things started to kind of coincide with one another. I went from small and tentative to now starting to get physically gifted, going through physical development and maturity, to really honing my skills and believing and being confident in my abilities that I could be the best.
It's interesting. Because people see you now, I can only speak for myself, but it seems to me people see you as a person who rarely, if ever, loses. And
Yeah,
you weren't always as good as you are now. It's interesting to think
no,
about.
not at all. I wasn't, man. It was, and that's the blessing that I have over a lot of my contemporaries, is because I went through so much difficulty as a young man. It makes me appreciate the victories much more, but also it helps me to operate with humility because I come from very humble beginnings. Like, I wasn't bred or built for
Mm,
this. It was one of those things where I got put in the right positions at the right time with the right people, and I focused my output on being disciplined and being committed to my craft, and just seeing just how good I could be and how far I could take it. And fortunately, those things worked out for me. So, as I go through this process, and even going down memory lane and figuring out, where I was at that time, and just reminiscing on those moments in my life, it's fun to think about, because at the time it's not as easy, right? When you're in the fire and there's so much uncertainty and you're not really sure, am I going to get a scholarship? Am I going to be a champion? I've been wrestling since I was a kid. Is this worthwhile? Is this been valuable? Will it pay off? Did my parents make a good investment? Should I have done something else? Do I have the right coaches? You're only at the expense of the provisions that you have. Now I could go to any RTC, I could go to any coach, got a massage therapist, nutritionist, chiropractor, functional medicine coach, like all these things. But when you're a kid, you eat what your parents put in the fridge. You go to to your local club, and you go to the high school in your district, and then you just see who you can become from that. So it was a much more simple process back then.
this is a kind of an aside, and I forget who told me, honestly. But I said something maybe 15 years ago, clearly never having met you and didn't know you at all, about how you were this prodigy or always great, something like that. And the person said, no, he wasn't. He willed himself to be great. And I thought that was a really interesting, like you didn't
Yeah,
have all the talent.
for sure. There was a motivational speaker, Eric Thomas. He always says, "Average skill, phenomenal will."
Mm.
That's what I felt like. I never really felt particularly talented, but I was willing to outwork my opponents. And especially when I saw that it worked. Like, once you realize that hard work works, you're like, well, damn, all I got to do is like run fast and lift hard and wake up early and like cut weight. And then it was just a no brainer for me. Like, it became part of who I was. Like, it was just so deeply ingrained in me that I was like, in order for me to succeed, I have to do these things in this fashion. And it continued to work. I kept getting better, kept getting better. So one thing you realize is some people were really good young, but never really loved it. Some people were really gifted young, but got burned out, got tired of it. Some people, parents pushed them their entire lives. And once they got freedom, they didn't really want to do it anymore. Other people were really talented, but once they had to put in the hard work and all else was equal, they didn't really want to be champions as much anymore. And then there are some people like me who love it, and regardless of the result, stuck with it, and then realized that they had something. They developed an identity within it, and they kept pushing themselves to see just how far they could go. And so, yeah, I never imagined that I'd be Olympic or world champion, and no one in my circle or even my parents would have never imagined that I would be the best in the world. So, I think it's the journey that I've been on. It's sometimes it's surprising to me. And now when you look back on it, of course, you're in a different space now. Like, I really work for it, but if I always try to have perspective with the young man that I was back in South Jersey, with relatively low expectations of how my career would unfold and what I've been able to achieve since.
Hmm. I always thought it was like a little unusual that you chose Nebraska. What
Yep.
made you decide
Me
to go
too.
there?
Me too, Pat. It was, you know, I didn't have a lot of options when I was coming out of high school. I only won one state championship, and that was my senior year. So by the time you're a senior, most guys already know where they're going to school. And there were a few things that happened in that period of time. One was my best friend, my next door neighbor, and my high school teammate. He was a two-time Jersey State champ. His name was Vince Jones. He was a nationally ranked wrestler. He went to Nebraska a year before me,
Hmm.
and him and I were as thick as thieves. We were really close, and so when he went there, I wanted to go and follow him and wrestle there. But they weren't offering me a scholarship because I still hadn't won a state championship. So he would continue to, impress upon those guys and put thoughts into their ear like, "Hey, this is the guy. Like I'm telling you, you got to go back and get my buddy." And I think they wanted to get me, honestly, not because of who I was as a wrestler, but what I meant to him.
Hmm.
Right? It's like when you talk about high level athletes, most of them have entourages around, right? And they have guys that are from home, whether it's buddies or best friends from their childhood, and it helps them stay comfortable, helps them have an element of home for themselves so they can perform at a high level. So I think that's kind of how they viewed me as a young man was, oh, if we bring in Vince's buddy Jordan, then Vince will be more comfortable, he'll perform better, and it'll work out so he won't be homesick. But then all of a sudden, my junior year, I took second in the state. And then my senior year, I won it. And then I won senior nationals as a senior. And so all of a sudden, I started to chain together all these great performances. And they were like, well, damn, this guy's pretty good too.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I think that my senior year, I went on 0 official visits. And by the time the spring had arrived, right after the state tournament as a senior, I still hadn't gotten any scholarship offers.
Hmm.
And so I remember packing up with my high school coach and my dad, and we went out to Pittsburgh to the Peterson Event Center. And there was a tournament called Senior Nationals. It was all the best seniors all throughout the country. And, they were all nationally ranked. They all knew where they were going to college. This guy's going to Oklahoma State. This one's Minnesota. This one's Iowa. This one's Ohio State. And so I got a chance to wrestle in that tournament, relatively unknown, but I ran through the tournament. I won 5 matches in a row, and I became the champion. And every guy that I beat on the way was on a full ride to somewhere in the country. And Mark Manning, the head coach of Nebraska, just happened to be at that tournament watching. And he saw me there, and he was like, "Man, this is a kid that Vince has been talking about for the last 2 seasons. Like he was right. Like he's really got something." And yeah, like as they say, the rest is history. Like 2 weeks later, he came to my house and he sat down with my family. My mom made him some salmon and some green beans and mashed potatoes. And he pulled out a pamphlet and a media guide for the University of Nebraska. And he sat me down and he pulled out this list of all these numbers. And basically he was like, "All right, this is what you're going to have to pay to go to school next year." And it was a zero. And I'll never forget like how excited my mom was, man. She was so proud. And he left the NLI there, the National Letter of Intent. And it was like, "We want you to be a part of the Husker program, and we think you can contend for a national championship." Now, whether he actually believed that at the time or not, it's hard to know. But it was from there that I was like, I don't even have to go. I hadn't even been, but it was the only place that was offering me a scholarship. I couldn't find Nebraska on a map at the time, but I knew that they believed in me and no one else did. So I was like, listen, I don't have to go. I don't have to see campus. I don't have to know anything else. You guys are offering me a scholarship. I'm going to Nebraska.
What a great story. And a testament to relationships. Seems to be a theme in your life.
Yep.
What's Vince up to now?
Vince is the head wrestling coach at our high school.
Oh, no.
Where we went to school together, Winslow Township High School in South Jersey. So he's a teacher and our head wrestling coach.
And you're still close?
And that's still my guy. See him all the time.
Mm-hmm. So what do you remember about your first year at Nebraska?
I hated it. I was just far from home. I'm 1,000 miles from home. I miss my family. I miss having home cooked meals. And I miss my friends and just the comfort that home provided. And when I got to college, it was Division I wrestling is a beast. Like it's a monster. And so when we got there, I'm thinking I'm going to get time to like settle in and get adjusted to being a college student. But we were preseason training the very first week of school. We were running stadium stairs, we were going for long runs, we were training, wrestling practice, we were lifting 4 times a week, and all this on top of going to class. I just wasn't adjusted. I wasn't used to the demands of what that required of me, and it almost broke me. I would sit in my room crying um, on certain days, just thinking like, man, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Like, I don't know if I'm made for what this requires me to be. This is too hard. And it was difficult because the only relationship I had was Vince. You know, when you're in high school, I was the best guy on my high school team as a senior. So I was ingrained with the coaching staff. I was the coach's favorite athlete. Like, he relayed a lot of information to me. So now all of a sudden you go from being the best guy on the team, state champion, to just another guy on the team, 1,000 miles from home. And I never even talked to the coaches. Coaches don't talk to redshirt freshmen. Well, you know what I mean? Like, I was just another guy on the team. So it was tricky for me because I thrive off relationships. But at that time, I really didn't have any. So it just made it really hard.
Did you call home?
Often.
What would that sound like?
You know, I think I knew I only had two choices. I only had two choices. The choices were to either lock in and focus and try to be better at my craft, or to go home and quit and look like an idiot and go work a blue collar job with my dad doing construction for one of the local unions here in Philly. So, you know, I think those were kind of my options. And so I realized that I could either control my own destiny. It was going to be hard, but I knew that I had it in me. I just had never really done it consistently. And wrestling wasn't my life up until that point. Wrestling meant a lot to me and I was really good at it, but it wasn't my life until my freshman year of college is when it really became my thing.
It's like a sound executive when he has to choose between bad and worse. He takes bad.
Yeah. Yeah. It really was. It was like, well, because it's you, just because you make a decision to be great at something doesn't mean you will be. And it also doesn't make it any easier because, you know, once you decide to make your goals public or to work hard, then when you recognize the standard that you've set for yourself, you always can also identify once you drop below it. And there's this conviction that you have when you do that because you know that you're cheating yourself. And so that's really tough. That's really tough. You know, so it's just like being a Christian for me. And once you have the Holy Spirit within you, once you're aware of sin, when you don't do the right things, you recognize it, and there's this conviction and there's this guilt and there's this shame that you feel. And so that's how it was for me when I was a young man. Once I decided to be great, when I wasn't operating at like a champion, I knew it, and it was hard, and it bothered me some days. But I think that I also recognize that what else is there? It's either you go hard and try to be good, or you go home and be mediocre or normal. Not mediocre, but just normal.
So at some point, you started to get a little better in college. And I'm assuming Coach Manning started taking an interest in you, meaning spending more time with you.
Yeah. Yep. So, yes. That was it. Coach Manning was my guy. So it took some time. My freshman year, right away, we weren't close because I was still a young man, and we had some guys that had been in the program a little bit longer with a little bit better and more understanding of where we were. But excuse me, as I started to get older and I started to become reliable, that's when our relationship started to build. I mean, most coaches at that age, they just want to know that you're a guy that they can count on. Are you going to score points at the NCAA tournament? Are you going to be low maintenance? You're going to stay out of trouble. You're going to go to class. You're going to avoid distractions. You're going to stay away from drugs and alcohol. You're going to respect women. Like, all those things are what coaches need to see from you as a young man. And so when you can present those to them, as well as being a competitor and going out and winning, it all comes full circle. And so once the coaches saw that I was willing to do that and I was a guy that they can count on, that was probably my sophomore year. My sophomore year, so my second year in the program, I started to establish a relationship, and the guys they could rely on me.
As a junior, arguably breakout year, you win a national championship. Followed up with another national championship as a senior at Nebraska. If I'm not mistaken, you won every award there was to win. How were you feeling about that time? What do you remember about it?
Yeah, I felt great. I felt great. That was the first year where I really felt like I had my own personal identity, and I felt strongly about who I was and what I was capable of.
Mm-hmm.
That was an important time for me. So I was thankful for exactly where I was because just a few years before I was this kind of young fledgling, unrecognized guy trying to get into school, and 3 years later I was one of the best guys in the country, undefeated, you know, kind of blitzed through the field. And I was, I, I had a lot of ROI for my coaching staff, right? They were like, man, we got this guy who's a diamond in the rough, and now he's a national champion as a junior. No red shirt. I just continued to improve at an astounding rate, and it was really helpful for me. So, yeah, my junior year was cool. It was kind of one of those times where you realize that, man, there was no like this epiphany aha moment for me. Like, damn, I'm really good. It was just like kept my head down, continued to work, kept grinding, getting better. And then I started to look at my body of work. I started getting closer to the guys that were beating me at once. Then I started beating the guys that were beating me. Then I started dominating the guys that were beating me, and it
Mm-hmm.
all worked out.
Um, when you think in terms of your senior year, were you thinking at that point that you'd go on to the international, start wrestling internationally, or?
Yeah, going into my senior year, I did. I did. Mark Manning was a honorary coach for the United States World Freestyle Team in 2010, and they were going to, I think the Worlds were in Moscow, Russia that year. And he came back with a set of DVDs, and on the DVDs was my weight class, 74 kilo. And he was like, hey, you got to watch this kid from Russia. His name's Denis Sargush. He's won the world championship 2009, 2010, two-time reigning champ. If you're going to be the best in the world, he's going to be someone you have to beat.
Hmm.
So like Manny would always tell me throughout my career, like, man, I've watched some of the best black wrestlers in this country's histories: Kevin Jackson, Melvin Douglas, uh, Kenny Monday, all these guys. He's like, I've watched these guys, and I believe that you have something similar to them. You're really difficult to beat. You're great on your feet. You can score from multiple positions. Like, you're versatile, you're dynamic, you're athletic. Like, these are things that I think could really be helpful for you on the next level. And so going into my senior year, I knew that I wanted to transition to freestyle. I didn't know if I was going to be great at it, but I knew that I could be good, especially because of where I was and how I was finishing my wrestling career. Like, I went undefeated my junior and senior year. I won the Hodge Trophy, which is wrestling's equivalent to the Heisman Trophy,
Mm-hmm.
as a senior in college, and I was beating dudes up. So like I knew I was going to be pretty good on a senior level. I just didn't know. I didn't expect this, but I felt pretty confident in my abilities. Now freestyle is a little bit different style wise in terms of the rules, but Manning he had wrestled freestyle for a number of years. A bunch of the guys that had come through our room had wrestled for a number of years, and I made the junior world team while I was in college. Going into my junior season, I was taking second at universities, or which are U23s now, as a freshman. And so, like, I started to get familiar with freestyle, so I knew I was pretty good at it, and my skills would translate well.
Hmm. Around that time, I forget, it's your senior year. Is that when you met Lauren?
Yep, yep, my senior
What
year.
was the story there?
Yeah, so crazy, small story, small world. My wife had three brothers that all wrestled at Division I universities. One wrestled at University of Buffalo, another at Arizona State, and our youngest brother wrestled at American. And so him and I were only a year apart. So my senior year in 2011, NCAA championships were in Philly. Her brother was an EIWA champion, conference champ. He qualified for the NCAA tournament at 141. I was at 165. So anyway, they're there at the NCAA tournament. Her entire family comes down to Philly to watch her brother compete. Her dad's watching the crowd and watching, the tournament unfolding. He's like, "Hey, this Burroughs kid from Nebraska, you got to watch this guy. He's pretty tough." So she's watching me throughout the tournament, and not only did she think I was a great wrestler, but she thought I was good looking, right? And so she sent me a friend request on Facebook a couple of days after the NCAA tournament, congratulating me, like, "Hey, I watched you compete this week. You looked awesome. Well done. Great job. I come from a wrestling family." And so just small talk. We got to conversing for a few months. And then I got introduced to a wrestling coach that lived in Buffalo, which is her hometown. And he invited me out to be a lead clinician at one of his wrestling clinics. And so on the way, I'm like, "Man, I remember that girl Lauren lives here. I should probably reach out to her and see if she wants to meet up." And so I sent her a message and I was like, "Hey, I would love to meet you if you get an opportunity to step out for a second. I'd love to buy you a drink or some food." And so she was like, "Sure, I'll come out and meet you." Um, and like as they say, the rest is history. So it was pretty crazy because she loved. I mean, one, she's beautiful. She's an awesome woman, but she loved wrestling.
Mm.
It's not a lot of beautiful women that love wrestling. And so once I found her, I scooped her up like a fumble, and I wasn't gonna let go of her.
What was that comment you told me about being tall, dark, and handsome?
Yeah, so that's what she said. She was in the stands, so she was way up in the stands watching me, and I'm at 65, and I've got like long, rangy
Mm-hmm.
limbs, and so from afar, she's like, "Damn, he looks tall." And she thought she was like, she's like, "When I saw you wrestling down the mat, I thought you were tall, dark, and handsome." And she's like, "When I finally met you in person, you were just 2 out of 3. You were just dark and handsome, but you weren't tall at all." So it was pretty funny because she was like, "Man, I thought you were like 5'10", 5'11" when I saw you down the mat, and then I got up on you." And I get that comment actually a lot. A lot of people see me in
Mm.
person and they're like, "Man, you look way bigger on TV." And I'm
Mm.
like, "Thanks. That makes me feel really good."
So, in total, how long were you at Nebraska?
In total, from the time I got there as a freshman in the fall of 2006, I stayed until the summer of 2021. So 15 years I was in
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln.
And what was it like when why did you decide to leave? And
Yeah, I wanted to get closer to my family. My wife and I, we realized we were going to have our fourth little one, and we were in the midst of COVID. And I was kind of telling you about this a little bit yesterday. Was we just realized that life was too short to be far away from your family.
mm-hmm.
During COVID, we had a lot of time at home. The wrestling room was shut down. We couldn't really travel or fly anywhere, and we were just spending a lot of time with one another. And the world was definitely afraid of what could occur at any moment. People were dying very suddenly. So we just wanted to get closer to our family. So we started to think about like a holistic lifestyle in which we could have our family around. We could have, great location geographically to live where we had amenities and culture and diversity. And we started to think about the places where we could do that, where we have great leadership and a great team. And really, Philly was the only place that made sense. So when we thought about it, we were like, "Well, okay, well, where can we go?" And Philadelphia was the place that just checked all the boxes for us. And so we knew kind of right in the midst of COVID that
Mm-hmm.
that we were going to go to Philly.
And what was it like for you leading up to delivering that message to Mark? And then how did he receive it when you told him?
Yeah, I mean, it was scary. It was really scary. Thinking about when I had to essentially give that message to him, because I was just like, "Man, I'm stuck in a space where I have been here for so long and I've become so ingrained in this program that I just can't picture myself being coached by someone different, being in a different city at a different university. It's just it's hard to leave here." And I had built such a great relationship. I was a big fish in a small pond. Everywhere I went in Lincoln, everyone knew me. I was
Mm.
welcome. I didn't have to show ID. to get into anywhere, I basically had the key to the city. Um, so before having that conversation, I was just nervous that, like, man, am I in this position where I'm stepping out with lack of perspective and understanding of what else is out there for me? Is this kind of one of those grass is greener on the other side, but it really doesn't offer as much as I think it may? So I was nervous. I was nervous, and I thought Manning was going to be upset about the decision to go. But I think he kind of realized that it may have been coming eventually. I don't think that they envisioned us staying in Nebraska forever,
Mm.
and no one even really knew that I was going to compete past 2020. So that was kind of a decision all of its own,
Mm.
is making the decision to compete beyond Tokyo, and then not only doing that, but doing it somewhere else. I just felt like it made sense, and he was really gracious. He understood, and he was like, okay, let's figure out a way in which we can do this amicably, and we can make sure that the world sees this as a mutually respectful departure, and that there was no disintegration of the relationship. It really just is something that we feel like is the right thing for both of us.
Mm. So tell me about your arrival in Philadelphia. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was it. You know, honestly, my arrival in Philly kind of stunk at first because, although I've gotten greeted by my coaches and my friends and my teammates and my family, when we got here, we had like bad luck the first week. The first week, we got our car broken into, and then we got into a car accident, and then one of my family members passed away, and so we
Mm.
had to go to a funeral. This is all in like within 10 days of us
Mm.
getting there. All within 10 days. It was wild. I'm like, what? But I think it kind of started bad or started poorly, but the thing that I realized right away was I had some high level teammates and I had great leadership and I was close to my fam. And so it kind of worked really well right away. I think I felt the connection with everyone. I felt like my life was better. My wife and I, because my parents were close by, we had more of a social life. We had more intimacy. We get to drop the kids off with my parents, or we could go out to dinner. We could go to a movie. We had the ability to hang out with our friends a little bit more often. We had an endless amount of food to choose from. We had Uber Eats, like little things like that were just like beneficial. We had the wrestling culture is much stronger here at a youth level. So,
Mm.
my son got plugged in with a great wrestling club. So I mean, just a lot of really good things happened once we arrived, and then we got to work right away from a wrestling perspective. So, yeah, it was good.
So what's it gonna take for you to get what you want over the next year?
That's a great question. That's a great question, Pat. Um, you know, it's going to take everything. Everything. It's going to take, there's going to be no balance in my life this year. And, my wife is on the same page, which I can appreciate. Because on the home front, as long as she's locked in with helping me achieve my goals, things can operate more peacefully. And that's important. It's going to take a ton of discipline, a lot of effort. Um, it's going to be hard. There are going to be some days that I want to quit, but it's going to take a lot of encouragement. What we've done, we've built like a team of individuals that we have all in like a group chat, and they all present different levels of expertise in a particular field. There's like a spiritual coach and a technique coach and uh, a nutritionist and a mental toughness and sports psychology coach. So like we have like all of these things that we need of people to keep me plugged in, um, to just make our best effort, to make our best push for it. Like this is could potentially be my last wrestling tournament ever. Is the Olympic trials in April of 2024, and so I want to give my best. I want to give my best crack at it. Like I want to be prepared in every way. My confidence has always come from my preparation. So the more prepared I am, the more that I've done. I've left no stone unturned. I've done everything right. Taking care of my body, myself, my people. It's it's gonna be cool. I'm the only one that can do it, to be honest. There's no one else in this country that can do it, that can pull off what I'm attempting to do.
Mm.
So, if it's gonna be someone, I think it's gonna be me.
Hmm. And when you talk about confidence, you made a comment yesterday that your preparation gives you confidence, but at the same time, when you've done so much to be prepared, that's when your fear is at its height as well. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, because there's this heightened sensitivity that you have when you've done everything right. Because you're like, this feels too good. It's almost like too good to be true. You need some element of, you know, I like to have, when my back's against the wall, I feel like I always am at my best.
Mm.
Maybe that's something I've just manifested in my mind that
Mm.
could be false, but I don't know. It's something that I think is true of myself. But ultimately, here's why I have those things, because when you do everything right, you expect it to be easy, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difficulty in aligning your reality with your expectation. When everything happens, when you train right, you eat right, and you take care of your body, it's still not easy. That's just a like price of admission, is you have to work hard. You have to dedicate yourself and commit to your craft and do everything right. And there's still no guarantee of victory.
Mm.
That's just to put your foot in the door and get you a seat at the table. Now you get a chance to compete. So it's still going to be hard. This guy's still tough. He still believes he can win. You're still the underdog, and you're still going to have to work your butt off and be mentally tough in the moment and be sharp and focus and keep good posture. And it's just going to be really, really difficult to achieve. So when everything goes right, I think it's easy to forget that. I think that's my fear. That's where fear comes into play, because I'm like, when everything goes right, I expect my body, my mind to be all in alignment, and any piece of adversity or any obstacle can distract me and derail me. Where when things are naturally hard and you're having difficulties and tough days, like you're just refined in the fire and you're prepared for anything that's thrown your way.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how things unfold. But I think that that's one of the things that I'm trying to mentally prepare myself for this year is I will be unflappable under any circumstance, whether it's hunger or fatigue or chaos at home
Mm.
or chaos in the wrestling room or chaos in the anywhere in the world. Like, my goal is to be the Olympic champion, and that's what matters most to me right now.
You have a great reputation among your fans, and you're really gracious with people. And I've been in your presence when there are dozens, if not hundreds, of people around you, and you might be in a hurry, and you always deliver such an elegant, performance. If it's a performance, but have you always been that nice, or does it come naturally to you, or did you have to develop that?
Yeah, there's a combo.
Mm.
Some days are harder than others, but I always want to be the representation of what I try to embody as often as possible. I think there's a civic duty that I feel to the people. When you become really good at something, you become a man of the people, and there are days where it's mentally draining. But I know that my life at times is a sacrifice for others to achieve greatness. They get a chance to watch me, and merely through my performances and my work ethic and my approach to life, they get an opportunity to see me and say, well, man, maybe I could do that too. And so I never want to disappoint anyone that ever gets an opportunity to meet me. Like, I want to embody grace and love and appreciation for the people who appreciate me. I think that's what life's all about, man. Like, it's it's bigger than you. It's bigger than you. So I have to get over myself and my own feelings. They're not really critical to me
Mm.
as much as the people are. So, you know, I think that's the most important thing. It's some days are hard. Um, I've learned to become more graceful. I've learned to stand my ground a little bit more. But whenever I have an opportunity presented to me to be amongst the people and be the people's champion, it's something a responsibility that I take really strongly.
Hmm. Have we seen the best wrestler you can be?
No, nope, not even close. That's what we're always in pursuit
Hmm.
of. I'm never perfect.
Hmm.
I'm never finished.
Hmm.
Um, I'll step away from this sport still being less than what I imagined or what I hoped that I would be. Now, I don't measure my career and my abilities by my championships.
Hmm.
Those are cool in comparison to like others or to the record books. But when you're comparing yourself and the ways in which you're trying to evolve in your own personal skill set and mindset, those things are constantly being elevated every single day if you can. But yeah, so I mean, improvement at this point, they're few and far in between. Minute jumps in my growth as a wrestler, but I think it's really mindset, Pat, because my skills are even much deeper and more complex than I'm able to display under
Hmm.
stress. Right? It's like if you have someone that everyone's intelligent, but not everyone can perform. So, I think that what separates the great wrestlers, the legends, from everyone else is not their knowledge of the sport. Like everyone knows a double leg, a single leg, a high crotch, but it's their ability to perform in stressful situations. And I think that is what separates people in every single field.
Hmm.
Like the hunger and the desire, like yeah, all that stuff is there, hard work, all that stuff counts. But when you step out there, you ask yourself two questions. Did you give 100% in your training? And are you willing to give 100% right now?
Hmm.
And I think that that's very important, is because I've known a lot of guys who have wrestled and trained hard, but had competition anxiety when when the lights were on and the moment called for it. And you know, I think that's where I'm trying to dwell in. I separate my identity from my performance. I try to detach myself from what I'm about to do. I don't exist. Only the task
Hmm.
exists, and that's important to me. Moving my hands, moving my feet, using my toughness, my grit, conceding nothing, fighting through every position, hustling back to the center, always trying to snatch the momentum when the opportunity presents itself, and continuing to just stay locked in until the final whistle blows.
Hmm.
So that's I'm always seeking or in sight of that perfect performance. I don't even know if I've ever had a flawless, or maybe a flawless match, never a flawless tournament. Um, so I'm always in pursuit of that. And do I think it's impossible? I mean, it's hard. I've been wrestling for a long time,
Hmm.
but there's so many variables in this sport, and that's what makes it tricky, but also what makes it beautiful.
Hmm.
Is anything can happen, and there's a big margin for error. As long as you stay the course and keep wrestling, anything's possible.
Are you thinking beyond wrestling at this point at all?
Yeah, I would say so. I would like to step away and understand exactly what the next season of my life consists of, but wrestling is my main focus for now.
I've asked you a lot of questions. Is there anything that you might like to ask me or say?
I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why I have tremendous respect for you, is because even as a master of your own craft personally, is you're always seeking knowledge
Hmm.
and seeking wisdom from the people that you admire. And I feel like there's a little bit of everything that you can take from the people that you've met and implement into your own personal life. So like the thing that I appreciate about you is, and that I realized for myself, is it's scary. It's scary transitioning into a new phase, right? Most people at my age at 35 are settling into what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. I'm transitioning out
Hmm.
of what I've done my entire life, but I watch what you've been able to create for yourself, and I know that oftentimes you attribute your success to the things that you learned in wrestling. Um, And so, I think that the mindset, it's in us,
Mm.
and and the tenacity, the intensity, the hunger, the drive, being a dog, like all those things are in us, regardless of what we pursue. It just so happens that wrestling is my craft.
Mm-hmm.
Just so happens, that you know this is what I love to do. But I think that if I can enter a new space with the same level of fervor that I have for wrestling, I think I could be great at it too. So no, I appreciate your openness, your willingness to continue to learn, to listen, um, your humility, and just the opportunity to speak on your platform. Thank
Oh,
you.
my pleasure. One last question. If we were talking 20 years from now and you were looking back on today, what would you have achieved in the interim to feel like you've been successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, a great question. I would say I want to elevate the next generation in this sport. I want to be a quote unquote kingmaker. And what that means to me is I want to take individuals that never imagined, a lot like myself when I was a young man, never imagined where wrestling could take them, and change their lives and the people around there. I want to ultimately, break generational curses. I want to, elevate the sport through the individuals that participate in it. I want to tell their stories. I want to make wrestling cool, and I want to enhance the capabilities for them to travel the world, get free educations, inspire the next generation of wrestlers coming up behind us, and then also to contribute to society with strength and honor, to be great husbands, great fathers, great leaders, great wives, great moms, like all of those things I think we're capable of doing just through this sport. Everything that I do is based upon the things that I've learned from wrestling. And so I'm extremely thankful, and I express gratitude daily for what this sport has done for me. And I want to give that to others. So that's my goal: empower others through the sport of wrestling, introduce it to as many people as possible, and continue to elevate it on the world stage where it gains recognition from the public, and casual fans realize just how special this sport is.
Mm. That's awesome. Well, as I think I mentioned to you in the past, it was a highlight of my life to meet you, and to maintain this conversation is just super special and fun for me. So thank you very much for that and for today. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, man.
Bye bye.